I first heard about the street from a patrol officer who didn't believe in patterns and didn't like having his routes questioned. He said he started avoiding the block without realizing he's doing it. Same way you avoid pothole after hitting it once. No conscious decision, just a correction. He said his cruiser would turn one street earlier than usual, or he'll take a longer route around it. When I asked him why, he said he didn't know. He just said the street felt wrong. That word comes up a lot in Gotham. Wrong can mean dangerous. Wrong can mean corrupt as well. Wrong can also mean quiet in a place that shouldn't be. The block sat between two active avenues in a narrow brick buildings close enough together to trap sound and bounce it back to the streets. The kind of place where footsteps echo even when no one's trying to be heard, except they didn't. The officer said the street had gone quiet, not empty, not abandoned. Just quiet in a way that made him notice his own breathing when he drove through. No reports had been filed, no cars logged. That was the part that bothered him. People complain in Gotham even when nothing's wrong. They complain, but this street hadn't generated a single noise complaint. No other reports or disturbing calls in months. Silence doesn't usually go unreported. I went to see it for myself just after midnight at the corner. The city sounded normal. Traffic rode past on the avenue. Someone argued outside the bar 2 blocks down. A siren cut through the air and faded. I stepped onto the block. The sound dropped away, not suddenly, not like switch. It thinned, like the street was pulling it inwards. My boots hit the pavement and made noise, but the sound didn't travel. It stayed close, dull, as if the brick wall on either side were absorbing it before it could escape. I stopped halfway down the block and listened. Nothing answered. No footsteps behind me. No voices from above. No movement in the alleyway. I looked up. Lights were on in several apartments. Curtains shifted. Someone turned away from a window too quickly. People were awake. People were watching. They just weren't coming outside though. I knocked on the door on the ground floor unit once, twice, no answer. From inside, I could hear someone breathing, slow, controlled, close to the door, like they already decided not to respond before I stepped back and continued walking. Trash sat where it had been dropped days earlier. No scavengers, no rats, no cats, even insects near the streetlights. That was wrong. Gotham's ecosystem didn't shut down unless something forces it to. The far end of the block, the pavement changed. A shallow depression ran along the center of the street, subtle enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. Like something heavy had been dragged repeatedly along the same path over time. The stone had learned the weight. I followed the mark back towards the middle of the block. That's when I felt it in the air, not sound, not vibration. The kind of pressure that makes you tremble. The kind you feel before you hear a subway train approaching underground. The streetlights dimmed silently, not failing, not flickering. I checked my watch and it is 1:11. The sudden pressure deepened and then I saw him. A figure emerged from the alley as the far end of the block, moving slowly, dragging something behind him on wheels. The object should have screamed against the pavement. It didn't. The sound died before it reached me. Figure stopped at the center of the block and waited. Door stayed closed. Windows didn't open either. The figure bent down and pressed the object against the street. The silence thickened. This wasn't fear. I didn't move right away. I watched. You learn most continued feel what matters to them when they think. System reveals how they work when you don't disturb the timing. The figure kept the object pressed to the pavement for several seconds, then lifted it and rolled it forward a few feet. Stopped again, pressed it again. The motion was careful, repetitive, not frantic, not aggressive, like someone's doing a job. The streetlight dimmed in small increments each time the object touched, enough to be obvious to someone passing by quickly, but enough to soften the edges of the block, enough to make the street feel flatter, less real. The kind of subtle change that makes people decide to turn around without knowing why. I stayed close to the building line and listened. The object produced something. That's not what most equipment produce. It wasn't noise. It was absence of noise. A cancellation, like pressure pushing back against sound wave before they could form. I could still hear own breathing. I could still hear the faint city noise from avenue behind me. But within the block, anything new was being flattered. The figure finished the roots at the center point, paused, then rolled the object back towards the alley it had emerged from. The pressure eased slightly as they moved away. The street lights returned to their normal brightness. When the figure reached the alley, it stopped and looked back down the block, not searching, but checking, confirming the street had returned to the right baseline before the next cycle. Then it disappeared. I waited another 10 minutes to see if the second person arrived or if the equipment was retrieved by a vehicle. Nothing. The block stayed quiet, but not as unnaturally quiet as it had been during the cycle. That means the object wasn't the only component. It was an activator. The rest of the system was already embedded in the streets. I left without being seen and sorted the part of the case that always takes longer than people think. Paperwork, map, ownership, and the slow questions of who benefit behind it. The next night, I came earlier. I watched the street from above, positioned on a fire escape that gave me a clear line down the center of the block and a view into the alley, the far end. From up there, the block looked normal until it didn't. That was useful. It meant whatever was happening wasn't obvious from a distance. It relied on proximity, on being inside the street when it activated at 12:58 a.m. The block's sudden sound like a huge storm that's coming, maybe a train, a distant television through a window, pipes settling, someone moving behind a curtain, quiet, but I see them at 1:08 a.m. The streetlights dipped slightly, not like a grid fluctuation, like a controlled adjustment. The timing matched the night before. At 1:11 a.m., the pressure returned. The figure emerged again. Same place, same route, same object. The wheel didn't squeal. The pavement didn't complain. That meant the object was designed to move quietly even without the street's cancellation effect. The person pushing it had done this enough times to know where it exactly stops when the object touched the pavement. I focused on the details right away. It was about the size of a large tube mounted on a low metal frame with rubber wheels. The top was flat, reinforced, and fitted with a handle. Cables ran from its base into thick conduct that disappeared into storm drain grates near the center of the wasn't temporary. It was integrated. Someone had fed hardware into the city infrastructure and no one had noticed. I watched the figure kneel near the storm drain and checked the connection. A quick inspection, a tap, a slight twist of a coupling. The movement was practiced. Then the figure rolled the object forward again. I wasn't looking at a superstition. I was looking at maintenance. After the cycle ended, the figure returned to the alley and disappeared. A few seconds later, I heard the door closed softly. Metal on metal in alley space. Not a car door, not a gate either. It's a surface entrance that I hear. I marked the time and location and moved to the alley. Inside the alley, the sound should have been louder, where there's echoes, debris, and constant drip from somewhere, but it wasn't. The alley held the same though quiet as the street, which means the system influence extended beyond the main block. At the end of the alley was a sealed surface door set into the side of a brick building that used to be a small theater before it burned out 10 years now. Newer than other doors, someone actually cared about the entrance, securing it. I didn't force the door. Well, not yet. A system like this doesn't exist without support. The person pushing the equipment might be the designer or they might be the operator. But either way, the quickest way to understand a system is to understand its resources, money, access, and who's behind every permission. So I went to the records. The theater building was officially condemned and owned by a holding company that didn't list real office address. That wasn't unusual. Gotham is full of shelled companies that own empty buildings. But what was unusual was how many surrounding property were owned by the related entities. Over the past 2 years, nearly every building on the Quiet Block changed hands. Different LLC names, different mailing addresses, same law firm filling the paperwork, same pattern transfers space far enough apart to avoid attention, close enough to show coordination. Someone was assembling the block, not for protection, it's to have control. Then I looked somewhere else. Infrastructure permits, street work orders, utility access, anything that would explain why a conduct could be the run into the storm drain without a city inspector noticing. There was no permits, which meant one of the two things. Either the city was being bypassed or the city was being paid to look away. Both were possible. Gotham functions on both in the corruption. I returned to the block on the third night with a different plan. Instead of watching the operator, I watched the building entrance now. If the system was affecting residents, one would eventually come out to check. People tolerate fear for a while, but they can't tolerate uncertainty forever. At 1:11 a.m., when the pressure returned, one window on the fourth floor cracked open slightly. A face appeared for less than a second, then vanished. Not curious, they're checking something I don't know. At 1:14 a.m., a stairwell light turned on briefly, then off. Someone approached the hallway and backed away. At 1:18 a.m., the operator finished the route and returned towards the alley, and at 1:19 a.m., I saw something I hadn't seen before. A second figure at the near corner of the block, standing under the street light that didn't dim as much as the other. The person wasn't inside the silent zone. They were on the edge of it, watching the streets like a supervisor watches a shift. The second figure didn't move, didn't approach, didn't speak either. They just observed. That means the operator wasn't alone. The system had oversight, so I followed the operators first from the rooftop to the alley to the service door. He unlocked it and slipped inside with the equipment. The door closed quietly behind him. I waited 30 seconds, then moved into the second figure. They were still at the corner. A man in a long coat, hands in pockets, head slightly down to avoid attention. He looked like he belonged in the Narrows, but the way he held himself didn't match the neighborhood. It was too still, too patient. He's waiting on something. Pushed without sound and spoke once quietly from behind him. Who hired you? He turned fast, startled. Despite himself, he's not a fighter, not a hardened criminal. A contractor? He didn't run. He didn't swing. He swallowed and looked past me like he was trying to calculate the shortest path away. I didn't give him one. I repeated the question, "Who are you?" He gave me his name, not his boss, but the person who paid him. Frenchy, he said. Harold Frenchy. That name didn't mean anything in the moment, but it did few minutes later when I checked my memory against Gotham's buried histories. Harold Frenchy had been a city acoustic engineer, but he's retired. Known for obsessing over crowd control, building resonance panics, the kind of specialist Gotham uses when it wants people to move without thinking. Kind of specialist you don't notice until someone goes quiet. I found Finchy last known address in the old municipal directory, a small apartment near the river, far enough from the Narrow to see like different city, close enough to the old theater district to keep him connected to whatever had broken him. I went there just before dawn. His apartment smelled like paper and other smells, maybe burnt metal, dust. The walls were lined with diagrams, waveforms, cancellation patterns, building maps marked with pencil. On his table sat a portable recorder, a laptop, and a stack of clipping above the theater fire. 14 people had died that night, not from flames, but from panic. Crushed in stairwell when the alarm sounded and the crowd surged immediately. Finchy had helped design the acoustic warning sign system for the building. The system failed during the first minute. The alarm didn't travel through. They didn't know where to go. They moved into the wrong way. The stairwell became a trap. Gotham called it accident. Finchy treated it like a personal verdict. When he opened the door, He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked like the man who had been expecting consequences for a long time. He didn't deny the street. He didn't deny the equipment. He didn't use the word haunting or pretend it was anything mystical. He called it containment. He said noise made people reckless. He said sound invite crowds. He said crowds invite panic. He believed the city's volume was the beginning of violence, not the result of it. He had chosen the block because it was acoustically simple, narrow walls, consistent brick, predictable resonance. He could shape it, he could tune it. He built a system under the street in stages. The equipment the operator dragged was the activating unit, a service level driver that synchronized with the embedded ampere below. The real system lived in the infrastructure, plates, circuits, driver mounted under the grates, connected to the old lines the city no longer monitored. He wasn't stealing money. He was buying a quiet. He was buying building through the shell company to protect his project. He was hiring operators because he was older now and couldn't do the physical work every night. He was paying watchers at the corner to make sure no one interfered when the system activated. He said he wasn't trying to hurt anyone, and I believed him. Didn't make it harmless. Human beings aren't meant to lose sound the way you lose light. Darkness is expected. Silence like that feels the world stopped listening back. It makes people anxious without giving them a reason. It makes them stay indoor and don't want to come out. It makes them move quickly through shared spaces. It rotates community one quiet night at a time. Finchy's project didn't need violence. It created absence, and absence is a tool in Gotham. I didn't argue with the philosophy with him. I asked him how to shut it down. He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he didn't want to imagine the block without his quiet peace. Then he told me where the main junction was, inside the burned-out theater. The service door in the theater alley opened with a new lock because Finchy needed it to be. The city had condemned the building, but condemnation in Gotham is most paperwork. If someone wants access badly enough, they'll find it. Inside, the theater smelled like a wet brick and old smoke. The air held that persistent faint ash, scent, fire leave behind long after they're gone. Mold had grown in corners where rain through broken roof panels. The door was littered with softened debris, rotten seats, plaster, wire that had been Finchy had built a workspace inside the congas, generators, fuels, junction boxes mounted on plywood, spare parts lined up with obsessive order, waveforms chart pinned to the brick wall like religion icons. In the center of the theater, beneath what used to be the stage, was the heart of the system he built. A main control cabinet tied into old manipul conducts. Finchy had tapped into the infrastructure the city never truly decommissioned. He didn't need a permit. He needed knowledge and time to build this. I shut it down the way you shut down any machine that has been allowed to grow too comfortable in a neglected city. Power off at the source, drivers disconnected, circuits sealed, controlled cabinet stripped as well. The moment the system went quiet, the building sounded different, not louder. Wind moved through broken panels and finally made noise. Water tripped somewhere in the rafter and stopped being swallowed. I went back to the block the same night and waited. At 1:11 a.m. nothing happened. Street lights stayed steady. Air pressure stayed normal. For the first time in months, sound traveled down the street the way it was supposed to. A distant siren bounced once and returned. A car horn cut across the avenue. A dog barked from somewhere behind a door. It wasn't peaceful, but it felt alive again. Finchie stood at the corner of the block, watching. He hadn't run, he hadn't fought. He had followed in the funeral of an idea. He didn't cover his ear, he just listened. His shoulders sank slightly as if weight he had been carrying had shifted. I told him the block would return to normal. He didn't respond at first. Then he said something simple, almost embarrassed. Thought I was fixing it. He said, in Gotham, that sentence has a long history. I turned him over to Gordon with evidence, not with drama. The shell company's paperwork, the contractor's payment, the equipment, the control cabinet, the recorded activation schedule, enough to ensure this didn't get dismissed as a strange rumor that faded away. Gordon didn't smile. He nodded the way he does when he's seen 100 different versions of the same problem.